Good morning. I'm Mary Yaeger, postdoc research scientist at the Center for Applied Earth Science and Engineering Research at the University of Memphis. I'm on a project from the Tennessee Department of Agriculture, and today I'm going to talk about the status and monitoring of West Tennessee aquifers. Groundwater is important to West Tennessee. Why? Because it is the main source of water. Nearly all public supplies, industries, and rural residents, including pivot irrigation, use groundwater. West Tennessee is also growing across many sectors. You've probably heard about the new mega site coming in Haywood County. Memphis is growing, Jackson is growing. Population is increasing, so there's an increased demand for groundwater, and we want to avoid limitations in water availability. So good planning requires that we know how much we currently have, how much we are using, and how much is recharge, how much replenishment is there to the groundwater. So my project has two main questions. The first is, what is the status of West Tennessee groundwater? The current thought is West Tennessee has an abundant supply. So the first thing I'm going to do is look at available data, what's out there, what's been gathered. What do we know? The USGS is my best resource. They have long-term groundwater monitoring, 8 wells in West Tennessee, although 7 of them are in Memphis. Then they also do a 5-year report and water use estimates. They have 4 irrigation wells in West Tennessee. And there's also the 2007 groundwater level report that was done for the whole region, including West Tennessee. In addition, my project, we are going to drill 3 additional wells in the recharge zone and continuously monitor them, take readings. The second question is, what is the recharge potential of rainfall and irrigation? How much makes it past the root zone to replenish the aquifer? So to do that, I'm installing soil moisture sensors in and below the crop root zone in the field, along with a rain gauge, and monitor during and after the growing season. The ultimate question is, the ultimate goal of the project, answer this question. What is the recharge rate? How fast is water getting back into the ground? So talk about groundwater and aquifers. What is the aquifer here? In the whole region, under 7 states, is the Memphis, the Mississippi embayment aquifer system. And part of the Mississippi embayment aquifer system is the Mississippi River Valley Alluvial Aquifer, the MRVA, which is just along the Mississippi River in West Tennessee, and also the Sparta-Memphis Aquifer, which extends from Arkansas under the Mississippi and under into West Tennessee. So those are the 2 main sources of water from this picture here. There's a bluff ridge that runs along the Mississippi River, and generally to the west is the MRVA, and to the east, you're pulling from the Memphis Aquifer. Depending on well depth, it could be the shallow aquifer alluvial, or it could be the Memphis sand, which is deeper down. The recharge zone for the Sparta-Memphis Aquifer is along the eastern edge of the regional system. Right here, this dark area on the map, it's the outcrop of the Sparta-Memphis Aquifer. And that's where rainwater can actually get into the aquifer, and then these arrows show that the groundwater flows in a general westerly direction. And this is that from that 2007 USGS groundwater level report. They took measurements at 160 wells in West Tennessee to get an approximate surface of the groundwater. So my study region is West Tennessee, but I picked 18 counties within the 21 official West Tennessee counties, that these are west of the Tennessee River watershed. So all the surface water in these counties flows towards the Mississippi River. The Memphis Aquifer underlies most of this region from the recharge zone, which is this blue region here to the east, flows west towards the Mississippi River. This area is primarily agricultural, with the exception here of Memphis and then Jackson in Madison County. And the continuous groundwater monitoring tends to focus here in Shelby County. And there's one well outside of Shelby County in Fayette. So our 3 observation wells for this project are here in the recharge zone in Gibson and Carroll County. The USGS real-time water use wells, I think one of them is not a pivot, but these 3 are. They're in Dyer and Lauderdale County. These 3 along the edge by the river are in the Merva. And then this one here in eastern Lauderdale County is in the Memphis Aquifer. Soil moisture sites that I have, I did one summer in Agri Center, but I had to pull them out because they till there. And it's a research farm, so they're changing things all the time. So I had to pull those out. But like Dr. Live's setups in West Tennessee, mine here in Gibson and Carroll County are permanent. I leave them in the field, just move the rain gauge. And then we have 2 collaboration sites with UTIA and Dr. Live, one in Dyer County and one in Haywood County. And that's where, in addition to his soil moisture monitoring in the root zone, I've added a soil sensor in at 5 feet below the root zone to see if any water is getting past the root zone. So agriculture is the main primary land use here in West Tennessee, and from the USDA National Statistics Service, the cropland data layer, these are the major crops. We got corn, cotton, soybean, winter wheat, and then wheat beans, double cropping, and also hay is a large land use. And here you can see just very faintly the blue of the recharge zone here in the east. And then this part west of the recharge zone is where the most dense agriculture is. So Tennessee is in the mid-south region of the US, generally as a humid temperate climate, which means we do get rainfall in the summer, but it can be unpredictable. So irrigation tends to be supplementary here in Tennessee, unlike in other places. So from the 2015 USGS water use report, over half of the irrigation comes from groundwater. But from the 2017 USDA irrigation survey report, only about 10 to 11% of Tennessee state cropland is irrigated. But most of the row crop agriculture is here in the western part of the state. There's not a lot of irrigation, but what there is uses both groundwater and surface water. So for this groundwater irrigation, I checked the Tennessee Department of Environment Conservation well database that the drillers have to report to when they drill a well. And from there, there's about 300 irrigation wells in 1999. So before 2000, this was the spatial distribution of those wells. So not a lot. And then I looked at 5-year periods from before 2000 to 2019, which is where the last data in the database was. And you can see that at the end, in 2019, there's 2,500 irrigation wells. So we went from 300 to 2,500, but there wasn't a major increase along the way until we got to the drought years. And that's when irrigation really started going in West Tennessee. But after the drought ended and it started raining again in the summer, there hasn't been that many. We're back to the historical pattern of a few going in every year. So because center pivots are costly to install, however, good yields are more likely when you have irrigation, and you can save money on crop insurance. Irrigated fields, the premiums are less. But dry years in the future may see a further increase in period irrigation. We don't have a lot of irrigation in West Tennessee, but when there's a dry year, farmers tend to put wells in. And these are those water use wells that the USGS has in West Tennessee. And this one here in Lake County has never reported any data, but the other 3 are reporting daily cumulative discharge. There's a flow meter on this pivot and it reports the discharge in acre feet per day. So in Dyer County and West Lauderdale County, these wells are in the Mississippi alluvial aquifer. And over here in Eastern Lauderdale County, this well is in the Memphis aquifer. The peaks, aside from this one here, I don't know what was happening the first day that started reporting data, but after that, they're all roughly around between 4 to 6 acre feet per day, but how often varies, probably depending on the crop and whether or not they had a wet year or a dry year in that location. Then the long-term groundwater levels for that one well that wasn't in Shelby County around Memphis, here in Fayette, it's in Northwest Fayette County. The USGS has periodic field measurements where they go out and take a water level reading manually in the well, starting in 1952 and continuously through to the present day. And you can see that historically, back in the 50s, groundwater was high and then it dropped off and it came back up for a little bit here in the 70s and 80s. And in the most recent years, there's some recovery back to historic levels. There is some period irrigation in the area, but the closest one is just under a mile away. So no direct effect, but you can see that because it's probably just outside the recharge zone, that when the pumps do turn on, it drops down in the summer, but then it comes right back up in the winter. They also, starting in 2006, installed a pressure transducer in the well and are continuously monitoring it, reporting daily groundwater levels. And this one, you can see the drier summers, the drawdown is higher, but in the last few years, I think the summers have been a little wetter and the minimum, the drawdown has not been as much. And the recovery in the wintertime it seems to be going back up to where it was before. Whereas this only starts in 2006, the earlier period seemed to be drier, but now we're getting wetter and the aquifer is recovering, which is a good thing. So the current project that we're on is for TDA. We drilled 3 observation wells in Gibson and Carroll County to track the groundwater fluctuations over the summer and in the winter, from both rainfall and irrigation, to also assess aquifer characteristics. How fast does the water move underground, and to try to get at this recharge rate. So the first 2 wells we drilled last year. There's a Hilltop Well in a non-irrigated field, and there's no irrigation wells within a mile or more of this particular observation well. The field that I'm standing in when I took this picture is actually rainfall fed. This well is centered around 3 irrigation pivots. There's 2 up here on this hill, and then behind this picture is a 3rd pivot. This one gives us some unique, hopefully, directional flow characteristics. So the effects of the 2 wells on the hill, which are shallow, and then the effects of the deeper well behind. Lastly, just here in May, we finished this well in an irrigated field on a hilltop. We wanted to drill in the bottoms field here by the creek, but it just never happened. The rain, and then they were planting and we couldn't get across the field. So we changed the location with the help of the farmer, and we put it up here on top of the hill by his other pivot. So we have 1 year of data from the first 2 wells that we drilled last year. This is our background well, in quotes, because there's no irrigation within a mile. And you can see that the water levels drop down during the summer, and then over the winter, they start to come back up. And I take both field manual measurements, and there's a pressure transducer in there taking continuous measurements. Over here, we have the second well, where it's centered among the 3 irrigation pivots. So in this, if you look at this cross section here at the bottom, you can sort of give an idea of the lay of the land. So there's a creek here, a shallow creek, then a steep hill, and this is where the first well is, TDA1 background. And then there's sort of a bit of a plateau, and then the land slopes up to the top, and then it slopes gradually back down to this deeper creek here over on the right. The second well is You got the two shallow pivot wells up here on the hill, then our observation well, and then behind it, there's a deeper pivot well. So in this second one, when they turned the first two pivots on, they're pumping about 1,000 gallons per minute, ran about 24 hours, a little over 24 hours each, but I only saw about 6 to 7 inches of drawdown. This one here is in earlier. I don't know what that one was from. Probably another pivot farther away, but you can't even see the effects of these first two wells. They're drowned out by that second well. So when that one turned on, we got 20 feet of drawdown. And that one was only pumping 700 gallons a minute for about 24 hours, but there was 20 feet of drawdown. However, the water came right back up afterwards. So to get a better picture of what this well is doing without that 20 feet of drawdown, I've kind of zoomed in on the chart here, and you can see that after the pumping season was over, crops were harvested, the groundwater slowly came back up. And there's that little drawdown again. I don't know what that's from. It would be interesting to find out. So we did a geophysical log of these two wells, and we did find some discontinuous clay layers. The background well here is mostly sand, but around 30 feet, there's a very thin clay lens, which could inhibit water getting in. Even though this is in the recharge zone, it's not pure sand underneath. And then over at this well, we actually saw quite a bit of clay-ish material in the underground. So the depth to groundwater from the ground surface, at the first well, it's about 70, a little under 70 feet down. But over here at the second well, it's 23 to 24 feet below the ground surface. And I don't have any continuous data from the third well. We just drilled it and finished it. But I took a manual reading last week and it was 24 feet. So that one's on top of a hill. This one, the first one's on top of a hill, but the groundwater is much further down on this one than it is at the third well in Gibson County. So soil moisture below the root zone. So near that background well in the non-irrigated field, I have a soil moisture setup as Dr. Leib described, where I've got 3 soil moisture sensors in the root zone under the crop. And then I've got a third one at 60 inches. We figure that's pretty safely below the root zone, which is roughly 36 to 48 inches. And I've got 2 different kinds of sensors. I've got a volumetric water content sensor, which is fine for making peaks like this, but the plant available water is the matrix potential. So this one gives you a more clearer picture of the water content in the soil, but this is what the plants actually can access in matrix potential. So it's good to know both. And in this plateau, it's a low slope, kind of a flat area on top of the hill, although the farmer said that's the wettest part of his field. So, but I wasn't sure how to go about installing in a hill slope with Fragipan. And so I started simple. I started with a flat area on top of a hill in a well-draining Lexington silt loam. In 2021, it was wheat beans. So I installed these after the wheat was harvested and the soybeans had started to come up. You can see the precipitation moving past the root zone. This is during the growing season. So this is later soybeans. So this is still in the growing season. Then at 60 inches, you can see the soil wetting up in both the matrix potential and the water content. And then it drains down. So we're thinking it's moving below the root zone and further down. So possibly recharge. Now, the second one is in Gibson County in the bottomlands area. So it's near that third well that we dug, but it's in that bottoms field. Another low slope field, but this one is very poorly draining, Philea silt loam. This one is sprinkler irrigated. They bed the rows there to help with drainage. So the roots get some, they're not saturated. And I think there's 2 tile drains that run through that field. So it's a little bit drained, but it's hard to move water off that field. In 2021, it was early corn. And you can see also I have the three soil moisture sensors in the root zone, and at 6, 18, and 30 inches. Then I've got the same matrix potential and water content sensors down at 60 inches. This one is a completely different picture. In this field, once the soil at 60 inches wets up, it stays that way pretty much all winter long. So this blank area in the graph is where I pulled the rain gauge and the data logger out of the field so they could get in and harvest the corn. And then after they were completely done in the field, I went back out and reconnected the sensors and put the rain gauge back out. So it's still pretty wet. And after the growing season, all winter long, both fields were saturated at 60 inches. So this is from our one of our collaboration sites, the one in Haywood County. So in addition to Dr. Live's root zone soil moisture sensors, I added just the matrix potential sensor, just like he has, but mine is at 60 inches below the root zone in the same fields, one on the hill slope and one in a bottoms field. And the same field is served by one pivot. And this is the winter, up until we pulled them out so that he could harvest the wheat. So the hill slope field was in winter wheat this winter, and same with the bottoms field in winter wheat. And you'd see some interesting patterns here. These are preliminary results. I haven't had time to really go through all of it, but you can see that at the beginning of winter, when it rains, but it takes a pretty strong rainfall, that 60-inch soil moisture soil layer does wet up. And then it dries down a little bit. Now, these are still pretty, the matrix potential 0 is fully saturated. So it's still pretty wet, but it does dry down a little bit. However, sometime in January, it just wetted up to saturation, and it root zone and all, it never moved the whole winter until mid-May, when it started to dry out a little bit. That's when we pulled the data logger out. Interestingly enough, the root zone layers do dry out a little in both of these fields, but then wet back up when it rains. But for the most part, they stayed at saturation all winter long. So I'd like to acknowledge first the West Tennessee farmers who helped me with this project, let me come into their property and put wells on their property and go into their fields and put soil moisture sensors. The farmers that Dr. Live works with, they'll let me go in and put a soil sensor deeper down. I'd like to thank the people I work with here at Caesar for research guidance and help in the field. Also, Dr. Live for all his guidance and mentoring on how to install and work with these soil moisture sensors. And lastly, the Tennessee Department of Agriculture for the funding to do this work. And here's my contact information. Best reached at email. This is the center phone number, but if you want to speak to me directly, email is probably the best way to go. Thank you very much for your time.